Hey everyone, and thanks for jumping back into the Cryptoverse. Today, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and we're going to be providing an update to the bull market support band. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and also check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. Now, the bull market support band, for those who are unfamiliar, simply consists of the 20-week SMA and the 21-week EMA. Those are currently coming in, the 20-week SMA at around 27,888, and the 21-week EMA is coming in at around 27,227. So more or less, the bull market support band, or bear market resistance band if you prefer, since we are in fact below it, ranges from around 27.2K to about 27.9K. So approximately a $700 range. Now, the reason we talk about the bull market support band so much is because it can provide a lot of insight into where we are within within the ongoing trend. And one of the things that we mentioned previously, I'd like to think we've done a fairly good job of getting most of the moves right. Of course, I don't get everything right. We know that. The receipts are there, and there's plenty of things I have been wrong about. But it is at least interesting that we talked about how we likely would see a rally into the death cross. I don't know if you saw that video that we put out, a few weeks ago or maybe a week or two ago, and then on the day of the death cross, we put out another video. So I think we put out a video over here saying that we would likely, sort of dip into it and then rally into the death cross. And then on that first day, we sort of noted that we were in fact getting that death cross rally. And here we are, right? I mean, the Death Cross rally, it materialized. I mean, it's funny how these things tend to, it doesn't play out exactly how it always does, but they do tend to rhyme from one cycle to another. And, once again, we get a Death Cross and then we rally on up, right? Now, we should look to see where the rally faded last cycle, because we did get a rally into the Death Cross as well back in 2019. And you can see that it actually faded after only a few days is when the high was put in. But the more interesting aspect was not how many days did it rally, but where did the rally stop, right? And you'll note that the rally finally stopped once it reached the bull market support band on a weekly time frame. Now, we should remember that we did wick above the 20-week moving average, right? So we did in fact get a wick above it. And you have to imagine that at some point during that week, this green candle was all the way up here, right? So if you just looked at that green candle on that specific day of that week, it would have looked like, right, we were above the 20-week SMA. And you would have necessarily known that it was going to come back below it by the end of the week, but it in fact did. But the important part is to remember that it was simply nothing more than a lower high, right? It was simply nothing more than a lower high. We had a high, we had a lower high, we had a lower high, and then this wick here was simply a lower high. It was even a lower high compared to that wick, right? So it was just simply a lower high. It was a close below the bull market support band, even though we wicked up to it. The rally kicked off upon the death cross, and you can see that we had a weekly close above the 21-week EMA, but below the 20-week SMA. Now, again, history does not have to repeat exactly, and there are other instances where it did not immediately fade, but we sort of talked about this going into it, right? We said, look, guys, we're going to spend half the year going up, more than likely, and we're more than likely going to spend half the year going down, right? Half the year going up and half the year going down. But in an uptrend, it's characterized by, several moves to the upside and several moves to the downside, but it's still generally trending higher. Just like in a downtrend, it doesn't always go down. Sometimes it goes back up, which is why we suggested that going into the death cross would be more than likely the most opportune time for Bitcoin to rally. Because again, and as we said, right, Bitcoin, the death cross headlines sort of come across. People are like, oh, that sounds bad. They sell. And they end up selling the local low only for Bitcoin and then just rally back up. So we put out a video on the death cross warning about that, because guys, don't fall for this, because this is what we normally see is we sell off just before the death cross, and then like on the day of the death cross, once it actually arrives, because it's a lagging indicator, it kind of tells you what already happened, and then you end up rallying after it for for at least a few days. Sometimes it can last a few weeks. So what will we be looking at? I mean, how do we sort of look at this and define whether it's sort of repeating the ghost of 2019 or if it's going on a different path? Well, I would say, look, we had this high, and we had a lower high on this wick, right? So this wick here was a lower high that went to about, just above $30,000, around 30.2K, 30.3K. Probably depends on what exchange you're looking at, but somewhere between 30.2 to 30.3K. If it's going to follow 2019, then it would mean not going above that price. You could always wick above the 20-week moving average and it not necessarily change anything. And remember, even weekly closes above the 20-week moving average are not necessarily that important if it's not multiple consecutive weekly closes in a row. If you get like 3 weekly closes in a row above it and you get follow through on it, then that would be meaningful, right? So you can see over here when we got above the bull market support band, we saw follow through in the following weeks, and therefore, the trend persisted for a lot longer. In 2022, when we got above it, you can see we just sort of got above it. There was no follow through, and then we just fell below it the following weeks, and then we continue to go down. So where we are today, if we were to get back above it, then I would still say, well, we still need to get multiple consecutive weekly closes above it for it to deviate, from prior expectations. And as long as that's not the case, then perhaps the status quo remains unchanged of generally spending half the year going up and half the year going down in pre-halving years. So, I would suspect that the most likely outcome is for Bitcoin to find some rejection up here. I don't know exactly where. Again, the 21-week EMA is not even that far from where we currently are. I mean, it's only a few $100s higher, 27.2K. I mean, you're talking basically just like $500 higher than the current prices is where the 21-week EMA is. And I mean, in 2019, we actually went higher than the 21-week EMA. We went actually higher than the 20-week estimate on a more, like on a daily time frame. But on the weekly time frame, we ended up still closing the week below it, and it ended up just being a lower high. Now, I do want to point out other scenarios, right? Like in 2015, you sort of had a death cross rally, and then we sort of sold off into the death cross, but then after the death cross, we still sold off. So we didn't even get a death cross rally. But we didn't get it, but then what ended up happening is we then rallied later on, right? You didn't really see a continuation of the trend. So I do want people to be aware that there was a death cross here, there was no death cross rally. Instead, the prices still stayed fairly suppressed for another month, and then we ended up rallying into the end of the year. Now, there are some similarities with the macro environment. More so, I think, sort of is like 2019 than 2015. Although neither 2015 or 2019 really give you a great comparison. Do note that in 2019, we had an inverted yield curve. We came out of that inverted yield curve, and crypto faded in the second half of the year. In 2015, we have to remember that crypto was relatively weak in the first half of the year. And so in the second half of the year, it mostly went up, which is why I think that time we didn't really see that. But I just want to remind you with these death crosses that what you normally see, right, and we'll look at it with golden crosses too, right? With a golden cross, what you normally see is you fade into the golden cross, but the overall trend remains the same, right? So you temporary fade, but the overall trend remains the same. Whereas in a death cross, you get a temporary pump, but normally the overall trend remains the same. Perhaps we could look at the last golden cross to get an idea of how long the fade occurred. Okay, I mean, you can see that on the day of the death cross, Bitcoin, we sort of faded into the death cross. We got a pump just right around it, but then Bitcoin faded back down and sort of hung around these lower levels. I mean, it lasted probably like a week or two. But then we ultimately continued the trend. We actually put in a lower low a little bit later on. But the overall trend still remained relatively intact, where Bitcoin continued to put in higher highs as we got further and further into the year. Whereas I feel like it's more likely to do the opposite this time as you rally into the death cross, right? But the overall trend is likely down, okay? So I suppose what I'm looking for here is for Bitcoin to find some overhead resistance, as we get into these higher levels. There's no guarantee that Bitcoin even makes it there. There's no guarantee that Bitcoin makes it to the 20-week SMA or the 21-week EMA. It's just that a lot of times when you get below it, you end up backtesting it, right? We saw this in 2018, right? You got below it, you backtested. We sort of backtested it here. In 2019, you can see we backtested it right there. It's a pretty common trend to like go below it and then you backtest it, right? Because I mean, a lot of the bulls, don't necessarily believe that it's over. And why should they? I mean, technically there hasn't been a lower low put in yet, so there is still reason for them to believe, although I still think this low will be taken out. The bulls are giving it another chance, right? They're giving it another go, and they're going to find out whether they can break through or not. If they cannot break through, right, if we spend a week or two and the bulls cannot break through, then what's more likely to happen is this is likely just sort of fades back down and puts in a lower low. And then eventually they'll try again, right? And then they just keep trying until we actually break through it. And then that would mark sort of the termination of the secondary scare. And then we go into, perhaps a more sustained bull market that might actually be able to take us to much higher prices. But in the short term, I think it's more likely that we do see rejections by the bull market support band. And if we do get above it, you would still need to see multiple consecutive weekly closes above it for it to really mean anything, right? And that's the hard part. I mean, even if you guys remember just a couple of weeks ago, Bitcoin wicked above $28,000, right? I mean, like we went above $28,000 and a lot of people were super, super bullish, right? And then like the next day it dropped back down. So you have to be careful. But what's funny is it's actually following 2019 almost identically at this point, right? I mean, you had sort of a capitulation, a week where we didn't do anything, and then sort of an intermediate week where we went up and got near that 21-week EMA, and then back down, and then it was a following week that actually got us back up here. You can see the next couple of weeks, we were in that bull market support band range, the next few weeks. And perhaps that's exactly what's going on now, right? You get this initial capitulation below the 20-week SMA, you consolidate for a little bit, you wick up for a week, consolidate more, and then you go back up to the 20-week SMA, 21-week EMA area, only to get rejected and for it to come back down. Okay, so, it could end up looking something like, I mean, you can sort of see the path here, but this is sort of the low. Perhaps it comes back up and then just sort of fades. Again, if you want to look for invalidation, right, if you're curious the invalidation, you would need to see, in my opinion, multiple consecutive weekly closes above the bull market support band for it to mean something, for it to potentially mean this time is different. Otherwise, I will sort of operate under the status quo of it's more likely to get rejected than not. And if it gets rejected, the issue is that there's just simply very little liquidity in the altcoin market, and then the altcoin market can get hit pretty hard just because there's not really a lot of liquidity in there, especially if Bitcoin rolls over and takes out this low over here. So that's what we're looking at this week, guys. We do have an important event this week. We do have the FOMC. I believe that's on Wednesday. It's on September 20th. So yeah, it's Wednesday. That could mark, a pretty volatile day. You might even expect to see price. Maybe it moves a little bit, early in the week, but I would almost expect it to potentially calm down before the FOMC meeting and then see some larger move, around that time frame later on in the week. And I mean, if they pause or if they skip, again, like, risk assets might like that. The issue is not the terminal rate. The issue is how long are they going to keep rates higher. So, I mean, normally when the stock market sniffs out the terminal rate, the stock market likes to rally. The issue is that the Fed, of course, is not going to say whether it's the terminal rate or not. And again, they could simply hike in November as well. They're going to leave that door open. I would not expect them to close the door on another rate hike just yet, although there is a possibility we are in fact already at the terminal rate at 5.5%. We have to wait and see. A lot can happen between now and November in financial markets. So we'll see what happens between now and then. But in the short term, Bitcoin is you know, it just got this weekly close. It sort of took out all these prior down weeks. We are nearing the bull market support band, and that is where the battle is going to take place between the bears and the bulls. You know, the bears will likely come out in this range to try to defend it. Okay. You know, the levels that we're at right now, I mean, we're literally there just like 2 to 3 weeks ago on this wick. So the bears did not really come out to defend until it was up in the bull market support band. That's where the bears came out to defend. Did they come out right here to defend it? No. Did they come out up here, the 20 week? Yes. So that's where the bears came out to defend, and we will see if they come out to defend it once again. If you guys like the content, make sure you subscribe to the channel, give the video a thumbs up, and again, check out the sale on Into the Cryptoverse Premium at intothecryptoverse.com. I'll see you guys next time. Bye.